What's up, guys? Welcome back to another daily Bible reading snapshot. Today, in the book of Deuteronomy, I want you to remember something that comes up time and time again. God is holy. Okay? Very simple, but God is holy. The reason that's important is the laws that we're going to see today reflect God's holiness, especially in chapter 23. That these certain people were not even allowed to enter into the assembly of God because they had certain things that were wrong with them. And God says, I don't want them in the assembly. I don't want these people from this particular place or these particular problems in the assembly because I'm holy. He gives all these rules and laws that are meant to make us see and them see God is holy, we are not. God is different than us. We need to make sure that we are right before him. So we're going to see that in chapter 23. Also, chapter 24, we're going to get some more laws. Something I thought was interesting. Verse 5 of chapter 24, it says, when a man is newly married, he shall not go out into the army or be liable for any other public duty. He shall be free at home for 1 year to be happy with his wife whom he has taken. We might call this the honeymoon period. That these people in Israel got to take a year-long honeymoon, not necessarily from all their work, but certainly from going to war or any other public duty that would keep them away from home. God is giving some very wise counsel, and I just want you to see that what we can learn from this law, even though we're not in the community that this is being enforced, I do want you to see, isn't there so much we can learn about what God cares about based on what we see here? You can learn about what God favors and what God cares about and things that are important to him based on what he told these Israelites. So this is not all just Old Testament stuff we don't need to worry about. This is helpful principles for us to take in our day-to-day lives too. So another reason I bring that up is in chapter 25, we get the line, you shall not muzzle an ox when it's treading out the grain, which doesn't sound like it's that important because you don't have an ox and it's not treading out grain. But Paul actually quotes this in the New Testament, and he says it's not just for oxes or for animals that the law was given, but for our benefit. And in that context where Paul quotes it, he's talking about paying the people who work at the church, the people who are pastors and elders and overseers. He's saying you need to pay them who preach the word. Why? Well, because he looks at the Old Testament and he says, you shall not muzzle the ox when it's treading out grain. You might say, well, what do those two things have to do with one another? Well, the law gives us principles that God cares about. God says, don't be mean to the ox while he's working so hard. Let him eat a little bit. Because he's doing all this work for you. Just let him eat a little bit. Give him something that's helpful. Let him have a good time or be blessed by doing the work. Then Paul takes that principle into the New Testament and says, hey, do the same thing with the people who are preaching the word to you. Now, that's not the point of this passage, but Paul makes sure to say it's not for oxes that the law was written. It was for us to learn from. So make sure that when you're reading this and seeing all these things and saying, okay, well, we don't have to follow that rule. That's not a law for us today. Just be careful and say, wait a minute, what does God want to teach us through this? Because I think there's some good things he wants to teach us. Like, what's the principle there? Don't muzzle the ox when it's treading out the grain. Make sure that you're generous to people who are working hard. Make sure that you're kind and generous with people, especially when they're doing nice things for you. Make sure that you're kind to them and maybe even going over the top and being generous to them. So there's a lot of principles that we take from the book of Deuteronomy, but that's all for today that I see right here. But let's look at the book of Mark. We're finishing Mark chapter 14 today. Mark 14, I think we're starting in verse 51. Yeah, that's what it says here. Mark 14:51. Funny passage. Basically, here's the story. There's some teenage boy who follows Jesus, and all he's wearing is his bed sheet. Okay? He got out of bed, put on all of his sheets, and followed Jesus. And when he is spotted and seen when Jesus is being betrayed, the guards, it says, seized the linen cloth around his body, seized him. He left the linen cloth, he left the sheets, and ran home naked. Okay? What is this about? Well, people have debated this, and I think the best answer is this is probably the author. This is probably Mark including himself. And here's why I say this. Because it makes no difference to the story. Okay? The reason people put stuff in these Gospels is intentional. They want to teach things. What does Mark want to teach through this? Well, the only thing that we can think of that he wants to teach is, hey, I was there too. I was a part of this. So another reason we believe this is it seems like in the book of Acts, Mark's mom lived in Jerusalem. So Mark was probably around. Also, from the circumstantial evidence of the book of Acts, it seems like Mark was younger than the disciples. So all this stuff seems to fit together that Mark was this young man who was spying on Jesus and his disciples, was seized, and he ran home naked. So that's a funny story. if you thought you had a bad day, Mark had a bad day. But speaking of people who had a bad day, Jesus has a worse day, because at this point he stands before the council, and the council that's going to condemn him to death, they're trying to find witnesses against Jesus, which, remember, in the book of Deuteronomy that we just read, what does God say about witnesses? You have to be put to death on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses that all correspond. Here's the problem. When people want to bring false witnesses to Jesus, they don't agree with one another. They don't have 2 or 3 witnesses that even agree, because it's all false witnesses. They're all trying to just accuse Jesus of things that he didn't do. But there is one thing that does stick. It's when they ask him, "Are you the Son of Man?" And Jesus basically says yes, and he quotes Daniel chapter 7 and says, "It's going to be crazy when you see me coming in all my glory." And they said, "Okay, that's enough. That's all we need. That's blasphemy. You're getting put to death." And then it says we see Peter denying Jesus. And if you remember what we talked about yesterday, Peter did not pray like he should have. He was not prepared to face this temptation. Right? Later on in his ministry, it says he's spending all this time praying and spending time in the Word with the disciples. And the next time he's confronted after this, he steps up to the plate and he actually is punished for following Jesus. We find that out in the book of Acts. So super important stuff today that we read. I think one big takeaway as we look at this is Peter was not ready. He wasn't ready. And this is kind of what we talked about yesterday. He wasn't ready to face this. But when he does get ready, and when he prepares, and when he's in prayer, he stands up. When he has the Spirit in him in the book of Acts, he's able to stand up against the pressure to conform to all the stuff that people want to say about the followers of Jesus, that to not preach and all that stuff. He does not conform. And now for you, when you think about this, you might think, well, I can identify with Peter because it's easy to fall and to deny Jesus. But I just want to tell you, you don't have to do this. You can be like Peter in the book of Acts. You don't have to be like Peter in the book of Mark. It's super important that we want to be like Peter in the book of Acts, who's prayed up, who's got the word in his heart, and is ready to face any persecution that he gets. So hopefully that's an encouragement to you today as you face things. Who knows what you're going to face? God only knows today. But you've got things to face, and you've got a life to live. If you're a Christian, you've got Jesus to stand up for today. So make sure you do that faithfully. So we'll see you back tomorrow for another daily Bible reading snapshot.